I like how you guys tell me how long it's supposed to take me to read, and then I'm like, should I time myself?
Right.
Am I a slow reader or a fast reader?
My grandpa's always like, it never takes me 3.5 minutes. It always takes me longer.
Yeah, but me too, because I'm like, eh. Yeah, anyway, I'm not that bright. I'm Arizona Family political editor Dennis Welch.
Dennis, fake news Welch. Try to tell the truth.
And this is the Politics Unplugged podcast.
Dennis, if you have a problem with substance abuse, I am more than willing to talk to you anytime you need.
Welcome back to another edition of the Politics Unplugged podcast. And today I am so stoked to be joined by the Axios team here in Phoenix. Jeremy Duda and Jessica Boehm, as people know her as Jessica Boehm. It's a long story. That's a long joke between her and I. But
people know Jessica Boehm.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. I want to thank you both for being here. And we're talking about, big issue. It's not the sexiest issue in news and whatnot, but it is probably one of the most important things in Arizona right now, politically and whatnot. Water, and I wanted to talk to you guys and go over the big water plan, that the governor has been announcing and talking about as we're ramping up the beginning of the new legislative session. And Jeremy, you've written about this. What are the big takeaways? What's the governor's goals when it comes to water conservation this year?
Well, the governor has a number of policies, a number of things she's looking at for water, and this is the one that's most likely to get done because she does not need the legislature to do it. It's something that her Department of Water Resources can do on their own. And just for a little bit of background, if you remember last summer, Governor Hobbs announced that there was a report that showed big groundwater deficiency over the next 100 years, and so they were going to stop issuing permits for water permits for new housing.
Mm-hmm.
And it really just affected two particular areas, Buckeye and Queen Creek for the most part, which is unfortunate because those are the two fastest growing places in the valley for the most part. And under our big Groundwater Act from 1980, new housing, new subdivisions in populated areas need a 100-year certificate. They have to get certification that they have at least a 100-year supply of water. And what the governor's announcement last year was that they will no longer issue those in those two areas for groundwater only. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big problem. So there's been a scramble to kind of find new supplies. And what the governor announced in her State of the State was a program called Alternate Designation of Assured Water Supply, which is cities themselves or utilities or other entities can get certification that they can be the provider. They have a 100-year supply for all the housing growth. And this provides some new avenues for Buckeye and Queen Creek to get that if they can get other water supplies. And so this is something that the Department of Water Resources is now working on, hoping to kind of get this done later this year so that these two cities can renew new housing certificates for all the massive growth they're expecting.
And Jessica, you've written a lot about housing. I mean, what's the reaction from the developer community? What are you hearing from them about the governor's plan? Is it not go far enough? Is it go too far? Is it too much? What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to realize that, as Jeremy said, these areas are our fastest growing areas. As we have developed as a valley, we have sprawled outward, right, over the course of many, many decades. This is the new sprawl zone. And so, as we know, we have a housing shortage that has driven up the cost of housing all over Metro Phoenix. If we can't build in those areas, we're either going to have to start getting denser inside the city, which is probably something we need to do anyway. But it's going to continue to drive up the cost of housing. So when this was first announced, the home builders and most folks were very nervous about what this was going to do. So I think that this first step, and of course we'll see how it plays out, but I think it is welcomed. And I think the hope is that it moves as quickly as possible so that we don't end up with a situation where we don't have the ability to build in some of these areas.
And there's the legislature, tell us a little bit about the politics of this going down at the legislature right now. You got Gail Griffin is sponsored a number of bills, dealing more with rural groundwater, because this issue is different geographically where you're at, and so that plays into the politics of the whole thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how, people in rural Arizona, what they want to see from this governor and how they're reacting to some of her proposals right now?
Well, it kind of depends. I mean, the ADOS program, the Assured Water Supply, this isn't really a rural issue because that only affects active management areas, which are the populated areas. Now, there's a whole host of other issues in rural areas, and the governor's been talking about those, and whether she can get legislative approval for that remains to be seen. But you have issues she wants to create more groundwater restrictions in rural areas where people can really just pump groundwater for housing, for agriculture, for industry, for whatever they want without any kind of limits. And we saw that with, Saudi-owned alfalfa farms in La Paz County. She wants new restrictions to prevent stuff like that. She wants subdivisions outside of these active management areas that aren't subject to that 100-year rule to be subject to it. And we saw how bad that can get in Rio Verde foothills, where they've had to spend a few years really sorting out this problem that had been kind of ignored for a while until Scottsdale cut off the water supply. And so there's new restrictions that the governor wants. I think, folks like Gail Griffin want to see less of that because, the more restrictions, the more it's going to cost, the more it's going to limit housing and growth. So I would be pretty skeptical about her ability to do that. Maybe the stuff for like the Saudi alfalfa farms, that kind of thing, probably better chances of getting something like that done because that's something that I think kind of aggravated people across the board, across party lines.
Which is kind of weird, like the aggravation of that, because, that's what agriculture, we ship millions of dollars worth of agriculture all over the world.
Sure. Well, the thing you have to keep in mind when we talk about water and housing is that probably, I think, 70% or so of our state's water supply, this goes to agriculture.
Yes.
And I've heard the 100-year requirement for housing described more as kind of a consumer protection law than an actual water conservation law. Because if you buy a house, you want to be sure that you're going to have the water there for the long run. If you're building a subdivision, you want to make sure there's enough water there for the long run. But you're talking, 70% or so is going to agriculture, and that's that's what that is. I don't think, for the most part, most people don't really care where that where those products are being sold, but because it's a Saudi farm, I think it probably raised folks' hackles a bit more than it might otherwise.
Yeah, it's like a political thing. Also too, like folks I speak to in the real world out there, they're always wondering, like, at what point is this going to start impacting my water bill in the city? And maybe Jessica, you can explain a little bit about that, and maybe just if any of these proposals, what you're seeing now, maybe helps with this in the near future.
Yeah, I think right now what we're seeing is most cities are taking a soft touch approach where they are starting to introduce measures that will make it more expensive if you spend more water. I think Phoenix last year implemented a additional fee if you go over a certain usage. I think it's $4 a month. Is that going to be enough to make people dramatically change their water usage? I don't know. Yeah. Probably not. But the point is that I do think if you compare water rates in Arizona to other states, we are fairly low, which is kind of funny given the fact that we don't have a lot of it. So I think it is well within the realm of possibility that cities will start raising water rates in a more significant way soon. But how soon that is, how that works, the politics of all of that, we'll definitely have to see how that plays out. But as Jeremy mentioned, while I do think it's important for everybody who uses water to be more aware of their water usage, the personal consumer water, homeowner water, is not an insignificant part of our overall water use, but it's not the largest.
Well, and a question for either of you. Part of the governor's plan too is going after what's called build to rent, and some developing some things aimed at developers where they're splitting up lots in order to avoid the 100-year water supply. And either you speak about how big of a problem these things have become or are, or whether they are a problem at all.
I know a bit less about that. I know this is something, if you talk to the home builders, for example, that kind of irritates them that you're building stuff for rent. It's not subject to the same requirements.
Yes,
now,
it's a loophole.
Now, depending on what kind of housing units you're talking about, it's not as big a deal because, I mentioned how much, what percentage of the state's water supply goes to housing or goes to agriculture. Well, if you look at the amount that goes to actual single-family homes, the majority of that is for outdoor use. It's for people's lawns and plants and stuff like that. It's not your shower, your dishwasher, your toilet, your sink, etc. So if you're building, an apartment complex, the water usage need is just not going to be nearly as high as if it is for 100 people living in an apartment building as opposed to 100 people living all in single family homes.
Yeah.
And I do think, on that note, I do think if we start to see more like personal homeowner restrictions, it is going to be on that outdoor use. We're already, again, with the soft touch, because we don't like to ban anything or be too hard or mean on anyone. But we are already seeing most cities in the Valley offer not small amounts of money, like a relatively decent amount of money if you replace your lawn with like xeriscaping. And I assume we'll see more of that as well on the pool side of things eventually. But yes, that is where, for the personal consumer use of water, the single family home use of water, it is mostly the outdoors that is taking up the most of our water.
And also too, with the governor's budget, proposal, it's coming out around the same time we're getting some dire economic news for the state, and I'm kind of interested in your take on how this is going to affect, water, water plans this year at the legislature, whether it be the governor's plan or whatever the legislatures want to do. A little background on that: the JLBC, Joint Legislative Budget Committee, had put out a report last week that estimates a $1.7 billion budget deficit for the current and coming fiscal year. That's probably, from what I saw, that's impacting what the governor wants to do when it comes to water, particularly with, we spoke a little bit about before taping here about the desalination plant, correct?
Sure. When there's a budget deficit, you don't want to be someone with state funds who's sitting on a bunch of unspent money, and that is because when people start looking for how they're going to bridge some kind of deficit, and that is exactly what's happening with the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. Now, if you recall, a couple of years ago,
WIFA,
Doug Ducey,
known colloquially as WIFA.
Not quite sure on the pronunciation.
Is it WIFA or WIFA?
A couple of years ago, right before he left office, Doug Ducey restructured this and created what he was described as a $1 billion fund, about $333 million per year, to help fund like really big ticket infrastructure projects. He didn't specifically say it had to be desalination, but I think that's what everyone kind of figured was
like
likely.
$1 billion.
Yeah, and which isn't actually enough to do this. But, but they're WIFA's looking at like a public-private partnership. Some sort of private sector entity that would foot part of the bill, and then WIFA would do the other part of it. Now, Governor Hobbs, she already cut part of that, $333 million appropriation last year for the current year's budget. And what she wants to do now is wipe out most of this year's appropriation. That would turn that $1 billion ultimately into about $500 million.
Well, she gets a $500 million savings there, and she's looking for, she's shaking every couch cushion down at the Capitol to find this money.
Sure. And remember, like about $400 to $500 million of the budget deficit she feels it can make up is a complete non-starter with the Republicans due to gutting some school choice stuff. So there's actually going to be more money they need to find. Now, this comes as WIFA is getting ready to finalize its rules, start seeking proposals from the private sector for these types of projects. So they're not too happy to see this, because this will have a major effect on what kind of project they can really fund. The difference between $1 billion and $500 million when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar projects, whether it be desalination plants, whether it be a pipeline from the Mississippi River, whether it be all kinds of
that's
other
what I was going to say.
Fanciful things that have been kicked around, and who knows if these are even realistic.
Well, I was going to ask you too, and not to interrupt you, to keep that thought, but I was going to ask, what is this desalination plant? If it's not getting built, what was it supposed to do? What's going to be the impact of this not getting done?
Well, it's hard to say. We're always on the lookout for new water supplies. Much like Queen Creek and Buckeye are looking locally for new water supplies to become these assured suppliers. The state we're in the middle of this massive, I think, 23-year drought that's the worst in thousands of years, is affecting the entire Colorado River Basin. We're seeing cuts to our allocation from the Colorado River, and because of the way the Central Arizona Project was funded and structured, we're the first ones in line to start taking those cuts. And so we have to argue with California, which politically obviously carries a lot more.
Yeah, you don't want to get in a fight with California, and they're 52 congressional members versus our 11 or whatever it is.
That's why we had to agree to be first in line for these cuts from the Colorado River in the first place. So California would agree to let the feds fund this back in the late 60s.
So just overall, we can kind of wrap up here. If you can give me a sense of your overall, what do you think gets done this year governor, legislatively, what are we looking at? What's kind of realistic? Because everybody I talk to is like, oh, well, it's the big issue, water this, water that. I'm not getting a real sense of what it's, these policies are going to look like at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say right now. I mean, the only thing I can say for sure that's going to happen is the assured water supply thing, because, as I mentioned, the governor's office, the Hobbs administration, could just do that unilaterally without the legislature. Some build-to-rent stuff I could see maybe happening. The wildcat subdivisions, rural lot splits, maybe less so. Rural groundwater restrictions, probably going to be a complete non-starter if folks like Gail Griffin are opposing it at the legislature. Hobbs still does have to, she may be the governor, but she has a Republican majority in each chamber, and she has to negotiate with those folks.
All right. Unless there's anything else, I think we can wrap that part up right there. But I do want to get some thoughts on you guys. Going to be watching any football playoff this weekend, and if you adopted any team, since my beloved Cardinals came nowhere close to becoming a playoff team.
Well, I am a longtime Green Bay Packers fan since birth. My extended family lives in Green Bay, so. I am very passionate and I am very nervous, and I have so much excitement and so much anxiety when I think about Saturday night and the 49ers. It's going to be a heck of a fight. But I don't know. I saw someone say, like, we're kind of playing with house money because no one expected us to beat the Cowboys. So let's just go out and have fun.
Jerry?
So maybe also win.
Well, sadly, I too am a Cardinals fan, so I don't have a dog in the fight. It's hard not to root for the Lions. It's
hard not to root for them.
You may disagree with me on that one, but
well, you can root for them this week.
This week, sure. The week we'll see what happens the week after. Love Lamar Jackson. Love to see the Ravens go all the way finally, and see Lamar Jackson get that ring.
Oh, come on! We gotta go going for the Lions. If nothing else, it makes Eminem happy.
But also, given that we are like a very firm partnership and we run a newsletter together and you have to deal with me every day, sad or happy, I would encourage you to also lend your support to the Packers tomorrow.
And I will be rooting for the Pack for you. I will be rooting for the Packers.
Dude, I think your work week's on the line with this game.
Go Packers.
All right, thank you both for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks.
And welcome to the back half of Politics Unplugged, the podcast edition. I want to thank Jeremy and Jessica again for stopping by here and keeping us up to date on water happenings in Arizona. Important issue, particularly when you live in a desert. Ain't that right, Colin?
Yes, it is. They were wonderful as always.
As always. And before we get, I just want to start off this conversation. A big, story this past week: Iowa caucuses. No big surprise there, right? No. I mean, Donald Trump gets, I believe, a majority of the vote, 51% of the massive amounts of caucus goers. And for those of you who can't detect the sarcasm in my voice, I meant to be very heavy on that. I think, 5 people showed up to caucus?
Something like that. We put so much weight on the Iowa caucus because it's first and they spend so much time there, but it's such a weird system.
Yeah.
That you're hardly counting anything there.
I mean, in full disclosure, I'm from Iowa. I lived there until my dad moved us out here when we were 15 years old. Love my Hawkeye State, but man, it is a weird system.
Yeah.
And with the weather out there, it was really bad. Turnout predictably low, no surprises.
Turnout was 14, 15%? Something like that?
Something like that. It was it was just really low for a weird cockamamie caucus system.
Yes.
Out there. But, once again, this looks like a coronation at this point.
It does.
It's fun for me to watch, if I can put my media critic hat on for just a second. It's fun to watch, some of the cable outlets still trying to make this interesting.
They all want the horse race. They all want something to cover. They're all desperately trying to build up Nikki Haley at this point. And you can keep trying. I don't think it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, short of some sort of legal problem that means they have to go to Plan B, I don't see anything indicating that there's any chance that the nominee is someone other than Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's the person who's going to win the nomination. Now, again, the legal problems that he's in and how those end up, whether he's convicted of anything like that, that's way out of our bailiwick here to be speculating on what happens with that, because we cover Arizona politics by and large. But, you know, one of the things you were bringing up the caucus here is, like, fresh off that victory, Donald Trump will be here at the end of the week on Friday for another one of his big rallies here in Arizona. He always draws a big crowd here. You expecting anything new from him this time?
We don't seem to be getting anything new from him.
No?
No. So I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
I assume he'll just go for the standard applause lines, and then wherever, you know, he tends to meander a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows where he goes with any of that?
Mm-hmm.
But no,
Well,
I'd be surprised if there's anything.
And one of the things is, like, you know, obviously he's been dominating in the polls. And one of the suspicions, and we've noticed this trend when he was president, and you know, maybe this plays to what we've seen. I tend to think that maybe some of his, you know, lead and his support right now is because he's not really saying a whole lot publicly like he has in the past, and maybe that's helping him. What do you think about that?
I think yes. And when he does come up with something new, it tends to sound particularly crazy to people who are not already Trump followers, I think. So I'm not sure if he comes up with anything new, he's growing the base. I think I think the Trump hope at this point is get that solid base he has, and hopes that Biden supporters don't show up. I don't know that Trump's growing that base with anything he comes up with.
Well, and that's always the question for me. It's like, how's he growing? It seems to be that they are using that argument very hard, that weren't you better off 4 years ago? And, you know, the dynamics of the race are changing right now, and anything can happen between now and in November. You know, the economy is still humming along. Inflation is down. Gas prices are going down. A lot of those issues 6 months ago looks like they're getting better, at least for Biden, you know, in his attempts to, you know, get a second term in office.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lot of panic around polls a month or two ago, and that was still a year out from the election. Yeah, and you know, and we're pointing that out. I think we, the media, were pointing that out. Like, you know, incumbents typically at a year out from election, you know, in recent history haven't been doing very well in job approval ratings and whatnot. And I still think a lot of the horse race polling that is way out from elections for presidents is still kind of a reflection of the job approval rating, if you understand what I'm saying. I mean, they may be asking who do you vote for, but there's still kind of like a job approval rating, whether they like the job that Biden is doing or not. It's a different question when you start getting into the fall of this year, like, you know, who are you going to vote for? It's not a job approval rating. You may think that candidate A sucks as the incumbent, but you may think it's still better than candidate B. Yeah. And we'll see whether that plays out here. And, you know, he'll be out here. It's always more interesting for me to see who's on stage with beforehand, who gets invited up there, and who he calls, and who the shout outs and whatnot. I noticed Carrie Lake was out there in Iowa. Like me, she's grew up in Iowa. She actually grew up in the Quad Cities, or near the Quad Cities. It was on the east side of Iowa on the Mississippi River. I grew up south of there in a little town called Burlington. It was on the Mississippi River, which I believe the Atlantic Monthly once wrote was, quote, quite possibly the dirtiest river town in America. Congrats. That's quite an honor.
So I'm very proud of that. We did a couple things in that town. We built tractors and bombs. So there you go. I know they got pretty well with that. But like, yeah, just that is what's going to be the most interesting to me, is like see who's up there speaking and what do they say, particularly with Carrie Lake, what she's going to be. I mean, she's in this big Senate race here early after she had announced. It was all about how Carrie was going to be moderating as a candidate and whatnot. You know, I was skeptical at the time that she was going to be a more moderate candidate, maybe in tone at some point, but certainly not. I didn't hear anything from her mouth what was like it was any different. And frankly, I just don't see any proof that she has moderated a bit at this point.
No. She hasn't told McCain voters to get out. Huh. She hasn't told McCain voters to get out. But, there's time.
But I did want to wrap up because we had a funny, we're starting to like a little behind the scenes here. This is, the type of year, you're opening up, you're getting into an election year, and we're getting inundated. Buried with fundraising emails.
And I don't know if people, we get them in the TV station all the time. I don't know how many people who don't work in this business, I don't know how many fundraising emails they get and how much they see them, but they're crazy. They're unhinged.
Yeah, some of them are, look, some of them are just pretty basic, like show up here and blah, blah, blah. But I think, like, I sent you one from a presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson.
Yes.
And she's raising money in a very interesting way. I was like, check this out, Colin. She wants to legalize like almost all drugs.
Yeah.
It is just like insane that you're like, this is you trying to raise money off of all of this. It was an interesting pitch. So I know that you look through a couple more of some of the emails that you're getting.
And honestly, you don't have to go far to find crazy. I was looking for the weirdest one I could find, and I only had to go back to 7:00 this morning. It's for John Tester, who is running in Montana. He's
I love how we get
Senate in Montana.
I love how we get fundraising emails for the Montana
the vast
candidates.
Majority of the ones we get in the newsroom are for like congressional candidates in Mississippi, or they're never local. The subject line on this fundraising email for his Senate race in Montana is, "When I was a kid, I lost 3 fingers on my left hand while working in our family's butcher shop." And people aren't really going to be able to say this on the YouTube version here, but there's a picture of him holding that hand up, missing 3 fingers. Colin, can I tell you a little story about me? I grew up on my family's farm, and it's still home today. That explains a lot about me. When I was a kid, I lost 3 fingers on my left hand while working in our family's butcher shop. I don't even remember putting my hand there, but I can damn sure remember rushing to a local doctor. Here's why I'm telling you this. Please tell me. Just like my $12 flat top haircut from my local barbershop back home and my collection of dirt-stained T-shirts, my background is a big part of the reason I remain grounded and focused amid the partisan politics and nonsense happening in our government. And so he has a nice thing on the back where you can click. They all have the same template. You can be, a presidential candidate who wants to legalize all drugs, or you can be a guy who wants to build a giant wall and a moat and gun stations at the border. You still all have the precisely same template for every email.
Yeah.
Where you can donate up to $250 or another amount. I'm pretty different from most people who end up in the U.S. Senate. I'm just a dirt farmer trying to do what's right for the people of my state.
And dirt farmer with 1 finger and a thumb.
You don't need 10 fingers to know right from wrong. I do want to say my all-time favorite fundraising emails were the Trump fundraising emails when he was president. And they would be purportedly from some campaign leader who would say, "Dear so-and-so, just want to tell you, I've noticed that you have not contributed recently, and I want you to know that I'm going to Mr. Trump tomorrow with a list of our top donors. And I'm going to hand him that list, and if your name is not on it, I frankly don't know what he's going to do."
Wow. That's
it was weird.
That's kind of threatening.
It is. It was an absolute. The big man's going to be very disappointed if he doesn't see your name on that list.
Well, I signed up for his something back in 15, 16 when he first started running, and I still get text messages, about this. And it's just like, and for years now, I've been getting final warnings. Like, if I don't contribute, they're not going to be asking anymore for years. Yeah. There's this whole thing, and it just pops up.
Much of a threat.
It's just like, please.
If you want to leave me alone, you go right ahead.
I can't wait until I retire and can just unsubscribe from all of this stuff.
Yes. I have the political fundraising stuff. As much as I can, I've funneled it into one folder, in my email. And I think that folder has about 1,300 unread emails right now.
Oh, man. Well, I just like that the Senate candidate, what's his name?
John Tester.
John Tester. I just like that he addresses you by your name.
He
It's
does.
very personable.
Yes. Of course, a lot of these come into like AZ Family News Desk. So when they do that, it says, please, AZ Family News Desk, won't you make a commitment to make our country great?
Yeah.
Please, AZ Family. It's a serious time.
Oh, man. Well, I think, next week's going to be a big week with him coming to town. So I'll just have to be looking forward to that. And I think with that, we're just going to kind of wrap up right here unless there's anything else
Sounds
you
good.
want to add. And
No, I think we've covered it.
right. All right. We'll see y'all next week.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the Google Store, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. See you next time.